Have you ever watched someone build an empire only to be cast aside by the very system they created? 12 years ago, I founded a logistics company that began with nothing but a whiteboard, a dusty warehouse, and a vision. Today, that company is run entirely by code, a sleek, efficient machine designed to eliminate human error. And me. My name is Dominic Hale. I was the architect of Virion Logistics, a firm once praised for its unmatched delivery precision and elite clientele. I trained the team. I closed the deals. I optimized routes that even satellite systems failed to predict. But in the end, I was let go not by a stranger, but by the very man I mentored, Ethan Cross, the board's new favorite, with big promises and even bigger software. They didn't fire me with cruelty. It was colder than that. They thanked me, politely handed me a generous exit package, and explained that visionaries sometimes outlive their own systems. I left with a box of memories and a single thought echoing in my mind. You can replace a man with software. But can you replace what he knows? That's where this story begins. I didn't come from wealth. No Ivy League degree, no family connections. Just grit, an eye for patterns, and a strange love for supply chain logistics. While others chased flashy startups, I studied fuel rates, dock schedules, and how weather patterns silently destroyed entire delivery cycles. That's how Virion was born, in a borrowed office with no windows, a second-hand coffee machine, and a single mission: do the work no one else wanted to do, and do it better than anyone else could. 12 years later, we had clients on 5 continents. Fortune 500 companies trusted us with their cold chain operations, sensitive tech freight, and emergency humanitarian shipments. We didn't just move things, we preserved reputations. I built that on experience and relationships. I knew which dock manager in Baton Rouge took early lunch breaks and which customs inspector in Amsterdam flagged shipments with red tape for no reason other than personal pride. And then came Ethan. He was brilliant, I'll admit that. Stanford. Grad, MBA with honors, obsessed with algorithms and disruption theory. I hired him straight out of school, not because I needed a prodigy, but because I believed in giving people a shot. Someone had once done the same for me. He rose quickly, too quickly. Our board loved his polish, his metrics, his buzzwords. While I was pulling 14-hour days managing fleet flows in a hurricane, Ethan was presenting slides about cloud-driven logistics and AI decision trees. At first, I was proud. I liked seeing him win. Then I started noticing the shift. The meetings became shorter. Fewer questions directed my way. When the board spoke of the future, it was always in Ethan's language, not mine. Eventually, I wasn't even in the room. I remember the day he told me. We were in the new glass conference room overlooking the dispatch floor. He slid a folder across the table like a real estate agent closing a deal. Inside was a consultant, agreement, and a 5-year non-compete clause. "Dominic, the board thinks it's time for a new chapter," he said gently. "You've done incredible work, but the system's evolving. Automation lets us scale beyond personalities." That line stuck with me. Beyond personalities. As if loyalty, trust, intuition, things we built our reputation on, had become liabilities. I didn't argue. What would have been the point? The deal was generous. A golden parachute, they called it. Severance, equity vesting, a ceremonial title. But it was all theater. I'd already been erased from the command chain months earlier. That afternoon, I packed my office. I didn't take much. A photo of my daughter from her first day at school. A brass compass my late father gave me when I opened our first cross-border account. And a weathered notebook. Handwritten routes, client preferences, doc codes, small things no algorithm could ever guess. Nobody asked for it. Nobody thought it mattered. As I walked past the dispatch bay one last time, I noticed something curious. The monitors now displayed real-time data streams, colorful dashboards, and forecasted efficiencies. But the air felt different, sterile, detached. The younger employees barely looked up. The ones who'd been with me from the start couldn't meet my eyes. I wasn't angry, Not yet. Just hollow. Ethan came to shake my hand before I left. You built something amazing, he said. Now we'll take it further. I smiled politely, nodded once, and walked away. But as I pulled out of the parking lot, watching the sleek Virion Tower shrink in my rearview mirror, I had a quiet, unshakable feeling. They weren't taking it further. They were taking it apart. I didn't do much in the weeks that followed, at least not in ways you could see on paper. I slept in, took long walks, sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee that never seemed to stay warm. My daughter asked if I was on vacation. I said yes. My wife Clara didn't ask anything at all. She just watched me quietly. The way people watch something heavy sitting on a table they're afraid to move. But the mind doesn't stop when the work does. I kept thinking about those clients, names, habits, odd little rules we'd learned over the years. Like Brinksfield Organics, who wouldn't accept deliveries before 10 a.m. because their floor staff did yoga at dawn. Or Marlowe Steel in Detroit, whose foreman always routed trucks through a side entrance on game days to avoid stadium traffic. Things no AI would flag. Things I had learned from years of phone calls, favors, and small talk that built trust. One morning, about 10 days after I left Virion, I received a message from Raphael, one of my former regional supervisors. Systems, glitching. Warehouse held 2 trucks overnight by mistake. Cold shipment for Pantera Farm spoiled. Ethan says it's optimization friction. He didn't ask me for help, just venting maybe. But I opened a spreadsheet anyway, the same one I used to manage our delivery exceptions. Old habits don't die. They wait. Then another message, this time from Lena, who handled international customs. New AI routed perishable shipment through Germany instead of direct route. 3-day delay. Client not happy. Ethan saying we'll compensate with data transparency. Whatever that means. It was the kind of chaos that doesn't show up in performance charts. Not right away. It hides behind graphs, spins itself, into language that sounds progressive. Learning curve, transitional dip, phase 1 integration. But what it really meant was this. No one knew who to call when the system failed. A few days later, I visited the old truck yard. It wasn't nostalgia. I just wanted to see it, I told myself. The lot manager, Gabe, gruff, with sun-worn skin and an instinct for machinery, was still there. We didn't shake hands, just nodded. He looked tired. They've been routing us based on fuel efficiency again, he said, lighting a cigarette. You remember the Cordova route? I nodded. Cordova was a trap, looked efficient on a map, but it crossed 5 school zones and a toll bridge that doubled back on itself. Any driver worth their license avoided it. Gabe shook his head. System. Pushed 3 trucks through it last week. Delayed all of them. One got flagged for speeding. He didn't ask for advice either, but he didn't have to. Back home, I began updating the spreadsheet. Not for revenge, not even for strategy, just to make sense of it all. I created columns, client name, issue type, time delay, root cause, escalation response. Old school, human, but clean. I called it ghost log. Because that's what I'd become, a ghost in the system, no longer visible but still tethered to every part of it. Clara watched me work on it one night and asked, "What are you doing?" "Watching them learn," I said, "the hard way." Still, I kept my distance. I wasn't looking to burn bridges, at least not yet. But then came the call that made everything shift. It was from Lancer Point Logistics, one of our oldest rivals. I hadn't spoken to anyone there in years. The voice on the line was calm, measured. "Dominic, I heard about your departure. I'm sorry how that went down. We're reconsidering a few things. Would you have time for lunch?" I almost said no, but something in his tone, professional but not opportunistic, made me pause. "I'm not looking to jump into anything," I told him. "We're not looking to poach you," he said. "We're looking to understand what the hell happened to this industry." 2 days later, we met in a quiet booth at a diner off Route 17. No suits, no presentations, just 2 people who'd been in the trenches long enough to recognize that sometimes progress isn't forward. It's just louder. They didn't want Proprietary data. They didn't want vengeance, they wanted clarity. I realized then that I wasn't done, not really. They had taken my title, my office, and my name off the door. But they hadn't taken what mattered. They hadn't taken what I knew. Word travels fast in the logistics world, especially when things start to unravel. 3 weeks after that lunch, at the diner I received a discreet email from someone on the inside. No name, just a subject line that read, "Thought you'd want to see this." Attached was a forwarded internal report from Virion's operations department, dozens of client incident logs, marked with escalating severity. Refrigerated shipments delayed, drivers rerouted through low-clearance zones, clients noting unresponsive support protocols and system-generated delays with no human override. Some of these weren't just errors, they were avoidable disasters. I stared at one report for several minutes. A shipment of pediatric antibiotics bound for a children's hospital rerouted due to a faulty risk calculation model. It sat at a rural depot for 36 hours in peak summer heat. The drugs were destroyed. It was the kind of mistake that makes a spreadsheet blink red but leaves a real-life consequence behind it. Not just cost, trust. I didn't feel satisfaction. Not yet. Just a grim recognition. They had underestimated what they replaced. Lancer Point. Had kept in touch. Nothing official, but the tone was shifting. What began as polite conversation turned into shared documents, then strategy sessions, and eventually, a quiet NDA. They wanted to understand my systems, not the software Virion had rolled out, but the decision trees I had built over years, of late nights and field calls, the invisible logic, the gut checks, the things that didn't show up on a dashboard but made the difference between a delay and a disaster. I never once offered a client list. I never shared proprietary routes I didn't have to, because the clients were already reaching out to me. One afternoon I got a call from Renata Keene, logistics director for Brinksfield Organics. "Dominic, is it true you're consulting now?" I hesitated. In a manner of speaking. She didn't mince words. "I don't know what they're doing at Virion, but 3 of our last 5 deliveries were late. One arrived in a diesel truck that reeked of fuel fumes. You know how sensitive our product is." "I know," I said quietly. "We'd like to talk off the record. It wasn't just Brinksfield. Soon Cold Echo Fisheries called, then Harrow Foods, then Clarion Medical Supply. I hadn't initiated any of them. I didn't need to. Word was moving faster than any press release. Back at Lancer Point, things moved quickly. They offered me a strategic consulting contract, then built a team around me. It was lean, experienced, and most importantly, human. We didn't aim to reinvent the wheel. We simply started fixing what others had broken by trying to automate judgment. I began training new coordinators on how to read clients, not just schedules. I rewrote delivery matrices based on weather histories and regional quirks. We built our own small tech overlay, not to replace humans, but to support them. A tool, not a substitute. Then came the breaking point. Elaine, a senior dispatcher from Virion, texted me in the middle of the night. Cold Chain just dropped them. That was huge. Cold Chain was one of Virion's oldest accounts, responsible for over 11% of their monthly volume. Their CEO had apparently flown in after 3 consecutive shipment failures. His statement was brief. "We no longer trust this system." I didn't celebrate. But I made a note. Lancer Point had just submitted a proposal to Cold Chain the week prior. It hadn't been a pitch, just a quiet suggestion. If you need human judgment, we're here. A week later, we were onboarding them. And so, piece by piece, it began. Virion's glass tower still shimmered in the skyline, but the engine beneath was misfiring. Client confidence was eroding. Drivers were quitting. Their IT director posted a job listing on LinkedIn with phrasing that screamed dysfunction beneath corporate speak. Meanwhile, I was sitting in a low-slung brick office on the east side of town, watching my team plan delivery routes on whiteboards, with actual markers, while software supported their decisions in the background, not the other way around. It felt like something old. And knew one morning as I stood by the loading dock reviewing a new cold storage protocol, my phone buzzed. Blocked number, I answered. Dominic, came a voice I hadn't heard in months. It's Ethan. We need to talk. I let the silence hang for a moment, letting the weight of it settle. I already knew what he was going to say, but I wanted to hear him say it. I met Ethan at a private cafe downtown. Neutral ground. It was the sort of place that tried to look minimalist, but still. Charged $12 for a black coffee. He was already seated when I arrived, shoulders tight, eyes darting to the door like someone expecting bad news and already bracing for it. Dominic, he said, standing as if we were old friends catching up. Thanks for meeting me. I didn't smile. I just nodded and sat across from him. He dove in quickly. We've hit a few operational inconsistencies since you left. Nothing catastrophic, but certain clients are struggling to adjust to the system. Some of our personnel are resisting full adoption. Resisting. It took everything in me not to laugh. Are you asking for feedback? I asked calmly. Or for help? He hesitated. We'd like to retain you as a consultant for a few months, just to guide the transition. A pause. Then he added, We'll offer competitive terms. I looked at him across the table. This man who had once been my protégé, who had called me obsolete in front of the board, who thought his algorithms could learn faster than relationships could grow. Ethan, I said, your system doesn't have a learning curve, it has a blind spot. He blinked. We're improving it daily. You routed medical supplies through high-altitude terrain during a snowstorm, I interrupted. Because it saved 20 minutes on paper, you sent seafood in unrefrigerated containers to a landlocked facility with no cold dock access. Because the software prioritized fuel economy over time, you're not improving, you're improvising. His mouth tightened. Look, we underestimated the complexity of some of the legacy workflows. Legacy. There was that word again. I leaned in slightly. You mean human knowledge, the kind you can't replicate in code. He didn't argue. That, more than anything, told me how deep the damage went. I didn't give him an answer that day. I left the cafe without shaking his hand, stepping out into the cold with a strange stillness in my chest. I wasn't angry anymore, just clear. I had something better than revenge. I had momentum. At Lancer Point, things were moving fast. My role had evolved beyond consultant. I was now the architect of a new operations philosophy, one that blended intuition with data, not buried it beneath it. We created a position called Client Experience Strategist, not an algorithm, not an AI feature, but a person assigned to each major client, responsible for understanding their quirks, anticipating their needs, and building trust. Just like I used to do, I brought in Elaine from Virion. She'd been laid off after speaking too candidly in a team meeting about the software's failures. I also rehired two of my best former route supervisors and a warehouse lead who'd once redesigned an entire cold dock sequence by hand when the system glitched midwinter. It wasn't a team, it was a correction, and it worked. Clients noticed immediately. Deliveries stabilized. Special handling instructions were not only followed, they were anticipated. One client, a pharmaceutical company, even sent us a handwritten thank you card after a sensitive vaccine shipment arrived early, with temperatures logged and protocols fully documented. You're the only ones who still do things with care, it read. That's what it came down to. Not just precision. Care. Meanwhile, my spreadsheet, my ghost log, had become a living document. We used it to train new staff. Not just in systems thinking, but in relationship thinking. The difference between getting a delivery right and getting it remembered. And the clients kept coming. Brinksfield Organics, Cold Echo, Harrow Foods, Clarion. And now, quietly but unmistakably, even international inquiries were landing in my inbox. Not because of a flashy interface, because word had spread that if you wanted reliability rooted in judgment, not just code, you came to us. One evening, while reviewing dock scheduling protocols at our Denver facility, I caught a moment of quiet. Forklifts moved in rhythm. Drivers cross-checked logs against physical maps. A dispatcher called out a last-minute route change after spotting a local parade announcement online, something no system could predict. It was controlled. Calm. Human. My kind of chaos. I stood there for a while watching it unfold. The system hadn't replaced us. It had simply given us tools to be better. That night I received a second call. Not from Ethan, from Cold Chain's CEO. His voice was clipped, professional. "We'd like to talk," he said, "about a long-term contract." I smiled. That wasn't just momentum anymore. That was gravity. It was only a matter of time before the cracks in Virion stopped being internal problems and started bleeding into public view. The first headline landed on a quiet Tuesday. Logistics giant faces backlash over spoiled medical shipments. A week later, a second wave hit the industry blogs. Clients were quoted anonymously, citing disconnected leadership, algorithmic inflexibility, and a complete loss of institutional memory. Behind the scenes, I was hearing worse. An old driver sent me a photo of half a fleet idling in a warehouse yard, waiting for a system override that never came. Another message from a supplier revealed that Virion had started quietly offering clients deep discounts, desperation disguised as generosity. But the tipping point came when Clarion Medical Supply, one of Virion's prestige clients, terminated their contract mid-quarter. No explanation, just a final invoice and a silence that screamed. Ethan called again. This time he didn't pretend. "We need help," he said flatly. I met him in the same conference room where he once handed me my exit folder. The symmetry was too perfect. Trevor Langford, Virion's new CEO and board appointee, was also present. I remembered him from years ago, young, sharp, a venture capital darling with the warmth of a steel elevator. "We'll get right to it," Trevor said. "We'd like to engage you as a transition consultant, short-term, high compensation. We need your insight on route integrity, client nuances, what we're calling legacy intelligence." Legacy intelligence. They couldn't even say it without sterilizing it. I kept my face still. "You mean the relationships you called inefficient, the exceptions you labeled distractions, the instinct you replaced with software that couldn't handle a rainy Tuesday?" Trevor frowned. "We've acknowledged the gaps. That's why we're here." Ethan shifted in his seat. "Dominic, we're offering $30,000 a week. Full access, minimal commitment." I leaned back, studying them. "You want me to hand you 12 years of lived experience, not documented workflows, not SOPs, experience. You think that can be copied in 6 weeks?" Silence. I stood slowly. "You didn't just fire me. You buried the system I built, and now that it's gasping for air, you want to dig up the body and ask it to breathe." Trevor's eyes narrowed. "Are you seriously turning this down? You'd rather see the company fail?" I didn't answer right away. I let the weight of the room settle. "I'm not rooting for your failure," I said, "but I'm not obligated to save you from it either." They weren't expecting that. Trevor recovered first. "We've heard rumors that some of our former clients have re-engaged with you. Are you sharing proprietary data?" That was the moment the mask came off. I stepped closer to the table. "No, I've never shared anything you owned, but here's what you never understood. You didn't own me. And you didn't own what I knew. You fired the knowledge and kept the software. That was your choice." Trevor stiffened. "We'll be watching closely. And we're informing clients of the potential legal exposure of working with you during this conflict." I nodded slowly. "Do that. And while you're at it, ask them why they left you in the first place." As I left the building, Ethan followed me to the elevator. "I didn't want it to be this way," he said. "I just believed in the future." I looked at him, not with anger, but something close to pity. "The future," I said quietly, "still needs people." He didn't follow me down. 3 weeks later, Virion officially missed their quarterly targets. Cold Chain and Clarion both released public statements praising Lancer Point's intuitive logistics strategy. The industry started paying attention, not just to us, but to how we were doing things. Articles called it a hybrid logistics renaissance. I called it common sense. But it wasn't just about me anymore. My team was growing. Elaine had taken over cold chain operations. Gabe, the old yard manager, now trained dispatchers nationwide. We had built something resilient, not because it was new, but because it respected what was proven. Then came a moment I didn't expect. I was sitting in my office reviewing onboarding plans for another former Virion client when my assistant walked in. "There's someone here to see you. No appointment?" "Trevor." He looked thinner, unshaven, less like a CEO and more like a man caught in the consequences of his own theory. "We're filing for Chapter 11, he said without introduction. "It's over. We lost our last government contract yesterday." I said nothing. "We're prepared to sell," he continued. "Assets, fleet, some of the IP. You could acquire it for a fraction of what it's worth. Avoid a bidding war. You'll get the drivers, some good tech, even the name if you want it." I looked at him carefully. "You came here to offer me the keys to a building I designed, after locking me out of it." He didn't flinch. "Because I know you can still make something from it." I didn't respond right away. There was no victory in his collapse, only a strange, quiet inevitability. I finally nodded. "I'll talk to my board," I said. "We'll see what's worth saving." And just like that, the empire that once erased me was back on the table. Only this time, I would decide what stayed and what didn't. The acquisition closed quietly, no press release, no public statement. Just a late-night signing in a dim boardroom and a checklist of what was salvageable. I didn't want the name Virion. It carried too much baggage. But the assets, the roots, and most importantly, the people, they were worth something. Some of them, everything. We didn't absorb them, we reoriented them. Drivers came first. The ones who had been caught between broken systems and angry clients now had a voice again. We held roundtables instead of issuing new protocols. It wasn't symbolic. It was strategic. They were the first ones to spot trouble on the ground, and the last ones Virion ever listened to. Then came operations staff. Many had been pushed aside or ignored during the automation wave. I brought back dispatchers who still carried hand-scribbled notebooks and warehouse leads who remembered which pallets always came in mislabeled from Brazil. We didn't reprogram them. We just re-empowered them. Within 2 months, our newly integrated team had rebuilt 60% of the Virion routes, not from scratch, but from memory, from the human knowledge that had been sidelined in the name of modernization. The transformation was quiet, but unmistakable. Clients noticed, not just in numbers, but in tone. "Feels like the old days," one client wrote, "but smarter." Another emailed, "It's strange how something as simple as getting a person on the phone makes us want to stay." We weren't perfect, but we were present, and that was enough. Meanwhile, the industry kept watching. A major trade publication reached out for an interview. They titled the feature, "The Man Who Brought Judgment Back to Logistics." It made me uncomfortable, but I understood the message. This wasn't about resisting technology. It was about remembering what it was for. The most meaningful shift, though, wasn't external. It was cultural. In the break rooms, people talked again, not just about KPIs, but about shipments, drivers, weird customs issues in smaller ports, and how someone once rerouted an entire fleet during a snowstorm in under an hour. I didn't correct them when they told the story wrong. It wasn't mine anymore, it belonged to the people living it now. One evening I stayed late to check a cold chain report. As I was heading out, I saw Elaine standing by the whiteboard in the operations pit jotting down a new client sequence. "Still at it?" I asked. She looked up and grinned. "You told us to think like humans. I'm doing that." That's when it hit me. It wasn't about me rebuilding what I lost. It was about building something better in its place, with people who understood what had been discarded and knew how to bring it back, stronger. As for Ethan, the last I heard, he'd taken a consulting role at a startup in the Valley, a company focused on fully autonomous cargo management. Maybe he'd learned something, maybe not. I didn't follow his progress. I didn't need to. I wasn't driven by spite anymore. What pushed me forward now was clarity, the kind you only earn after losing something you thought was yours forever, and learning it never really was. The system hadn't failed because it was flawed. It failed because it forgot what made it work in the first place. And we remembered. In logistics, as in life, efficiency can never replace understanding. Technology is a tool. It can optimize, accelerate, and even predict. But it cannot empathize. It cannot adapt to a dock manager's habits, a regional weather pattern, or the unspoken agreement between a trusted driver and a nervous client waiting on a fragile shipment. That kind of intuition is earned, not programmed. What this story revealed, beyond the failures and recoveries, is a truth we often forget in the pursuit of innovation. Systems serve people, not the other way around. Strip out the human element, and what you're left with may be fast, but it will also be hollow. So here's a question worth asking. What have we lost in the name of progress that's actually worth reclaiming? If this story resonated with you, or reminded you of something you've witnessed or lived, share it in the comments. These conversations matter more than we think. And if you want more stories like this, about people, systems, and second chances, consider subscribing. Not for the numbers, but for the dialogue. Because sometimes what seems like the end of a career is really just the start of a better way forward.